Alright, I need you to understand that every time Xebec appears in the story, Oda changes my complete understanding of One Piece. And I don't think that that's an exaggeration, because first it happened with his crew, then it happened with God Valley, and now Oda's saying that he's Loki's hero and went to Elbaf? Let's just say I am more than hyped to dive into all of this, so thank you, Oda. I needed this great chapter today particularly. And seriously, this chapter has some absolutely massive implications for the most recent history in One Piece as well, and they all seem to center around the man of the hour, he with no face and the crooked smile, my boy Xebec. Because honestly, whenever the world, aka the fandom, needs him the most, my boy is appearing. And it's also always so random. Or is it actually? You see, I feel like I've cracked a pattern with when Oda might have decided to drop rocks into a chapter, and based on that, plus what we've gotten confirmation for in this chapter, I do feel like I personally have a much better understanding of who Rocks actually is supposed to be, and more importantly, what he was actually trying to do. So let's start, shall we, with what Rocks was actually doing in this chapter, and that is, you know, just straight up a nice thing, stabbing kids. I guess. You know, classic scallywag move if you ask me, taking your sword and shanking a little giant, but hey, I can't say I blame him here because Loki was probably a bit of a brat. Look, I mean, he even said that himself. Yeah, despite Rox's, let's call them questionable moves, he clearly had a reason to be on Elbaf when he dropped the line, "I didn't come here for brats like you." I started kind of thinking about, what did he come to Elbaf for then? And it's that fact that I do want to focus here first. You might have already forgotten, but we just recently got some big, crazy big lore reveals about Nika, the first and second worlds, and now this robot laboratory Ghibli looking thing in the last chapter. Maybe Oda used that new Ghibli AI filter. I doubt he'd do that. And now we also have Rocks being framed as Loki's hero and inspiration, which kind of opens up a whole new can of worms for me. How much did Rocks influence the current Loki? Are his dreams of being the sun god and destroyer of the world connected to his view of Rocks? And if so, what does that tell us about Xebec himself? But to me, the most important question is probably, why in the world did Rocks want to go to Elbaf particularly? And to me, I already had the answer. I'm just cool with it like that. I am incredibly confident that Rocks went to Elbaf, of course, in pursuit of knowledge about the true history of the world. I mean, honestly, why else would he be here? Unless he was drinking buddies with King Harold or linking up with some giant baddie like Scopper did, you know? The man has no other clear reason to come here besides seeing the mural, learning about the Harley, and uncovering the secret histories that Elbaf has been hiding from the world. Right, okay, actually, this is not entirely fair. I can't think of one other reason that Rocks might have wanted to go to Elbaf, but I will get to that in just a moment. So you kind of see where I'm getting with every time. Why is this ringing again? Hey, hi, hello there, it's me, the Fleet Admiral. Well, the higher-ups have told me that I've got to go help out the Holy Knights, but I'm in a little bit of a pickle here, actually, Manu. Why? What's going on? Well, how should I put this? Recently, a bunch of giant monsters and dragons just showed up, and these guys are huge, like even bigger than the giants, but luckily, I'm actually learning all kinds of pointers for how to deal with these beasts because I recently downloaded the VIZ Manga app and I'm checking out Kamudo, a brand new fantasy adventure from the artists behind the Legend of Zelda manga. Oh, so it's got dragons too? That's pretty nice. Oh, it's got dragons, alright, and they're totally awesome, Manu, and any fan of titles like One Piece would love Kamudo, I'm pretty sure. Really, it makes me feel right at home. It's got epic fantasy elements, it's got insane world building, it's got a super unique power system, and absolutely insane artwork. And thanks to reading the latest chapters on the VIZ app, I think I'm really ready now to confront even the most fierce dragon right behind me there. Yo, I'm actually pretty sure that those monsters are actually on your side, man. Hold on there, Manu, I'm gonna have to let you go. I'm about to get stepped on by a giant version of your mom. Just remember to get a VIZ Manga subscription to read Kamudo on the website and on the app. Alright, bye. Okay. Sounds pretty cool, but let's get back to the chapter now. Now, we've never gotten hard confirmation that Rox was searching for the poneglyphs or for Laugh Tale, but I do think the implication is pretty damn strong at this point. Remember, Sengoku speaks about Rox and how he committed the worst taboos in the world so that he could accomplish his goal of becoming king of the world. And I always like to call attention to that specific word that Sengoku uses here, because when it comes to taboos in One Piece, there is one thing usually in particular that is specifically meant by that. Sure, I'm confident there are some other things like marrying your cousin or something. Who knows if that applies in the One Piece world, but for certain we do know that the word taboo is specifically associated with learning the true history of the world. And that's because Professor Clover actively says that this is the case. So if Sengoku gives a warning about Rox committing the biggest taboos to become king, and then now we see him with a specific goal arriving in Elbaf, the place that I think you and me both still agree, I hope, the final road poneglyph either is or at least was before the man marked by flames took it, well, it kind of draws a pretty clear thread for Rox's motive, don't you think? At least in my mind it does. Like, Rox probably went searching for the poneglyphs or things like the mural and the Harley to uncover what was going on with the world government or just the One Piece world in general, and that way he could finally try and overthrow them. Like, at this point I wouldn't even be surprised if Rox himself was searching for the next Nika or thought he could become the next sun god, and I kind of say that because it would explain a ton about Loki, his worldviews, and his ambitions, being a certified Rox fanboy himself. Now, I don't know about you, but I do think it's kind of totally obvious that Oda wants us to see Loki as Luffy's opposite. Not in an evil bad way like with Blackbeard, just in the way that he has a very similar story to him. Loki kind of spells it out for us when he remarks that he understands himself why Luffy wants to see Shanks so badly, because he kind of looked up to Rox the very same way that Luffy does to Shanks, only that, you know, he's kind of dead now, probably, question mark. And actually, now that I think about it, wouldn't it be kind of hilarious if the reason that Loki hates Shanks so much is because he is Roger's adopted son? You know, what if Loki kind of had the spiteful, you're not all that type of bad view of him because Roger defeated Rox and now Shanks defeated him? That would kind of explain it. And I think it would be just absolutely hilarious if we all thought it was this super serious thing, when in reality Loki was just lashing out against Shanks with the playground, my dad could beat up your dad type of beef. That would be a very Oda thing to do, to be fair, but that's not the only thing about Loki that we learned from this little Rox flashback. I think it's also pretty clear that Rox is the man who inspired Loki first to go out to sea 16 or so years ago, leaving Elbaf. After all, Shanks inspired Luffy to become a badass good boy pirate, so it would be pretty logical, considering their parallels, that Loki did the very same thing and wanted to become this cool pirate, kind of like he thought Rox was. And an obvious question is, why stop there? Why not go a step further and really follow in his footsteps? Like, what I want to get at here is maybe Rox thought he was the reincarnation of the sun god Nika, and that's why Loki now thinks that he is the sun god as well. And actually kind of think that this is definitely the case based on what we currently know, all thanks to Loki's last line about Rox in this very chapter. Because do you remember the classic line that Roger delivered on Laugh Tale? You know, the one where he wishes he could have been part of Joy Boy's era? It was written to show us that Roger was born too early and would have loved to be a part of Joy Boy's liberating army. Either, I guess, you know, the next Joy Boy, Luffy, or the previous Joy Boy 800 years earlier. At least that's kind of the safest bet, considering what we've learned recently about Joy Boy and his battle with Emu. Actually, now I think about it, it funnily also serves a little bit to my personal theory that Roger was setting up Shanks, Crocus, Rayleigh, and Scopper across various spots on the Grand Line to help the next Joy Boy. I guess that fits in pretty nicely. But most importantly, you've got that idea down now, right? So this chapter went ahead and very specifically reused that same line with a twist. I was born in the wrong era is what Loki tells us, but he clearly thinks that he should have been born earlier to help Rox in his endeavors. But why? Why would Loki so desperately want that if he thinks that he's the next sun god? Well, I do think it's a pretty safe bet that Loki may have thought the same thing about Rox Xebec. I mean, Loki, a descendant of an ancient giant from Elbaf, raised to worship the sun god, met a man who was ruthless and strong-willed, searching for the true history of the world. He kind of probably saw a man with the potential to conquer it all in order to, I guess what he would say, save the world by force and with his incredibly destructive power. power, something that we have seen multiple times from other Rocks pirates as well, just saying Kaido wanted to save the world that way, Big Mom wanted to save the world in like a weird way, and Rocks, a man who can so casually tell Whitebeard, the strongest man, to shut his mouth. I mean, pretty badass move. Now, if that doesn't reek of destructive Nika potential, I kinda don't know what does. And a quick aside to call out how in this very same chapter, Rocks finally seems to beat the fraud allegations as he casually drops a very powerful giant, even though a kid, and Whitebeard doesn't stop him. People now start calling him a new fraud because the sword he stabs Loki with isn't a black blade. I mean, come on. First off, there isn't enough detail in that panel to even say that that's the case. Secondly, what are we even talking about? I don't even think that that was Xebec's sword. His sword is clearly a boat. I mean, look at it. Come on, it's right there. I swear, people don't even read the manga. It says it right here. Saber of Xebec, duh. Alright, the reason I brought all of this up about Xebec thinking that he's the sun god isn't just for fun, of course. I do think that the reason that Loki wishes that he could have sailed with Rocks on his crew and that he thought he was from the wrong era, because with this, I think it's giving us a very clear path for Loki's character for us to follow going forward as Luffy slowly convinces him that, well, it turns out he is the real sun god, probably by accident. That way, Loki could realize he wasn't born in the wrong era. He's like literally precisely in the era he's supposed to be to help Luffy bring about the new dawn. It's just that he was supposed to be fighting alongside Luffy, the real sun god, not Xebec, probably a false sun god. And considering that Elbaf is the arc full of false sun gods already, throwing Rocks in here, like at this point, weirdly enough, is pretty intentional, in my opinion at least, to kind of strengthen that entire theme. Now, I do want to admit though that Xebec may have had some other plan here in Elbaf as well. As I briefly said earlier, Rocks could have also had a different goal, and it could revolve around Elbaf's mythical devil fruit. Because in my books at least, there is a good chance that Rocks wanted to get a hold of this legendary fruit, and then it ended up being the, you know, fancy crown jewel of Hachinosu, this mysterious treasure thing that he was then chasing on God Valley after it got taken. And yes, I do have an idea what this fruit could have been, but I do want to save that for a whole video in 2 days because it's a little bit too long, you know, to fit into this video and a little bit too speculative, but it's gonna be out on Tuesday, so keep your eyes open for that. But since I was just talking about Loki, Xebec, and their motives, I wanted to also talk about one more thing before I cover some other of the pretty awesome stuff that happened in this chapter and what it could mean going forward. So, we now know that Loki wanted to sail alongside Rocks. Well, there are 2 small ideas that I just can't shake now that we've actually found out about this. One, I think is unlikely, but I should talk about it to be fair and bring up a counterpoint, and one that I want to happen just very badly based on what we know here. And the first one that I'm not a super big fan of myself is the idea that Loki might end up being a pseudo-villain and joining Blackbeard's crew. Now, again, I don't think, or at least I don't hope that this will happen, only because Oda, in my opinion at least, is clearly drawing Loki to be a really solid dude and ally, especially in this chapter with Luffy feeding him. They kind of seem to be messing around almost like a Straw Hat Pels, and even Hyrogin seems to be letting up a little bit on his brother after chapter 1143's ending, when Loki said that he didn't kill Harold with pure murder in his heart. Scarpa also has a very specific line in this chapter that I wanted to talk about because I like to think that after 6 years of diligent Oda analysis, I often read these chapters, you know, with a lot of subtext in mind, if you get my drift, and this line I personally think is full of it, but again, it's just my gut feeling as, you know, a professional One Piece reader, I guess. Scarpa is the one who battles the Loki dream monsters that the children made and makes a note to call out that they don't know the real Loki and that if they did, they'd know that he is much stronger than just this. At least according to all the translations that I've been seeing, because unfortunately it's kind of hard to get a hold of the Japanese official at this point, but yeah, I don't know why that is. But if that is the case, I think that Oda calling this out is a clear indicator that Gaban knows the true Loki and is now personally my current frontrunner for who the mysterious Mosa character is. So again, I doubt that Loki will join Teach, but I do think it's kind of necessary to call out that since Loki is a big fanboy of Rocks and clearly Blackbeard follows in his footsteps as well, at least possibly Loki could ally himself with the Titanic captains, even if it's just misguided worship and faith, showing us a misguided but good person like Loki rallying behind the wrong man carrying his idol's will on. Plus, I guess it would then let Hyrogin fight against Loki Loki, and in my eyes, it would be to bring him back to Luffy's side in the end anyways, and that way he gets that frustration out like a true giant, instead of just never getting to resolve the clear emotional damage that he has from Loki in their childhoods. But in case you haven't picked up on my subtle hints here, I don't like that idea. I kinda want Loki to be a good guy right away, but I also think that Oda may have sneakily set up a battle in the future with some of these same points that I have just covered, because I think there is a pretty decent chance at least that during the final war, we might see Loki actually square up against Blackbeard instead of joining him. And I kinda like to see this playing out in a way where Loki wants to prove to Teach that his evil views of Xebec are wrong and that Loki knows the true will of Xebec. I don't know, maybe Loki thinks that beating up kids is just chill and cool, or maybe he kind of sees it as his version of Luffy cutting his eye. You know, a way of showing a young up-and-comer what they need to be strong. And however Loki is justifying it in his head, since he has a positive view of rocks, I guess, he fights Blackbeard in a rock's biggest fan sort of way. Maybe they can do rock, paper, scissors. Okay, that was a bad joke. Like, it's kind of like when people completely misinterpret the messages of their favorite series, and then the fandom starts fighting over who is right and who is wrong. I'd say luckily One Piece is pretty clear about the whole anti-establishment down with the government messaging. I mean, you and I both know clearly what Oda's getting at here, right? Right? Yeah, for sure. All right. I do think that I should focus on the rest of the chapter now though, because there are some really cool hints at what is to come in the next few chapters here. Like, for example, I am super pumped to see what happens when Oda decides to flip the entire series on its head and has Luffy swear allegiance to the Colon Pirates. I mean, I'm just pointing out here that this kid has been poaching Luffy's entire crew at this point, and Luffy better get in line because Colon, that kid, has some real potential. I mean, clearly Oda is drawing some deep ties between Colon and Luffy as well, and also Loki. There's a lot of tying here in this entire arc, and they also have this similar relationship with Shanks as well, so I'm gonna call it now. Sun God Colon is on the horizon. You just wait and see until it happens. Now, unfortunately, Captain Colon has guided the Straw Hats into a little bit of trouble here as Gunkko is about to battle them. Also, I needed to call out quickly the JoJo pose that she hit when she landed. Like, that is straight up a Jonathan or Josuke pose. I mean, I see you, Gunkko. Strut your stuff, all right. But despite the totally raw pose here, I do think that this is shaping up to be an incredibly interesting course of events, as there are some heavy hitters on this little ship as well. And by heavy hitters, I do mean Jinbei and Brook mostly, I guess. Actually, knowing that she's a Brook stan might make for some absolutely hilarious comedy at the top of the next chapter. Though after that, since Jinbei is honestly really strong up there with the power trio, like, this will be a very interesting litmus test for how powerful Gunkko actually is if they end up fighting. And yet, being the contrarian that I like to be, I kind of have my doubts also that they will actually end up fighting here. Because as I talked about last week, Gunkko has some weird stuff going on and could very well be a revolutionary in disguise, or at least a former revolutionary. So if we see her just grab Colon and barely harm the Straw Hats in the process, I do think that that could be the moment I definitely commit to this Gunkko is good theory once and for all. Also, I want to think that it's kind of important to note who is distinctly absent from this encounter but incredibly close by. Nico Robin. You know, the one person on Elbaf that would have a good chance to recognize Gunkko as a revolutionary, or at least former revolutionary, but she isn't around for this fight, but is close enough to see her if the battle goes a certain way. So I just wanted to kind of point out that there is a chance that Oda reveals things here and now, or it could be him saving a Robin and Gunkko interaction for later on in the arc. Or I guess the last option is that there's just nothing there and Gunkko is just a holy knight and has some other backstory. She's a cool character one way or the other. But Gunkko is tied to a very other important part of this chapter, because Skopper calls out a voice that is tied to the holy knights. Which immediately got me thinking, can this man also hear the voice of all things, or is this something else? And the fact that Skopper points out that Elbaf isn't safe from it and that the end of the world truly is approaching, I am locked in, my boy. Like, is he talking about the abyss? Is he talking about Imu? Can Skopper hear something through these magic circles with his observation haki? Rocky? Like, if so, what the hell is that? I mean, the safe bet here would be Imu's presence, right? But with all of these ancient dragons and demons appearing in the mural and the Harley and the fact that Scopper actually knows what happened, you know, since he was on Laugh Tale and read the entire story, well damn, maybe something even scary and deeper is going on that we all still don't know about yet with Imu. Like, the call of the void seems to be strong, and I am unbelievably excited to learn more about all of that. But now something else that I haven't touched on yet that is super cool also from this chapter is the homie shield Nash. Because it seems like this thing is a homie from 63 years ago, and is the shield Loki gonna reveal a bunch of info from early Elbaf during the time of Big Mom? Because that would be pretty epic, especially because we don't actually know if this shield is a Big Mom homie or a Mother Caramel homie. And my gut feeling is slightly leaning towards Mother Caramel one. And if so, that would confirm that the homies can actually live on after the user dies, similar to how Boa statues would stay stone after she dies as well. Meaning that, hey, for all we know, Big Mom might actually be dead and Nami would still then have access to Zeus. Which, you know, oh, also, wait a second, I didn't think about this until right now, but if Xebec was on Elbaf, did Big Mom come back with him? Like, the timeline doesn't really confirm when she actively joined his crew for the big score, but there is a chance at least that she was already around when he came to Elbaf, which would be interesting, or she joined after. I just thought this was interesting considering the winter solstice was brought up in this chapter specifically, but you know, isn't it kind of odd to specifically bring that up right now in this context? Like, it's cool lore and world building, don't get me wrong here, but I do feel like this detail particularly might be a small piece of evidence that Oda is dropping for us here to point at Mother Caramel's story being way more important to everything than we previously all thought. Something I just wanted to point out here, because lately all these false sun gods have kind of made me question stuff like Prometheus and Pandora, you know, the literal sun homies. I just think it's a super interesting thing to have brought up now of all times. Like, is there a connection? Does that mean the forbidden flame or the forbidden sun, is it alive? Is that the like, I don't know what the takeaway is. Elbaf's little core through line is that it's a sun god bargain sale, and everyone who thinks that they are super important in this world ties themselves to the Nika brand. So maybe, just maybe, Oda was seeing that way earlier with Pandora, Caramel's sun homie, and her role in the story as well. And speaking of Big Mom, have you ever stopped to consider who else is on her level? Like, what characters are truly threats in the final saga capable of squaring off with a Yonko or even stronger? Well, don't you fear, Manu is right here with a video breaking down all of the Yonko level characters in the story that I think will be in the final saga or have been in the story so far, able to fight on that level. You know, please check that out. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. Big shout out to the Patreons. If you haven't, you know, checked out Patreon with all its perks, do that. And now I will leave because I think the end screen will show up late, probably already has. Bye bye.